All right, so I was reading this blog post the other day, and I wanted to make a response to it. It's called "A Theoretical Case Against Education" on the Astral Codex 10 blog. So I'm just gonna pull it up right here. So um, I would say the main thesis of this article is like um, people don't remember facts well from school, and the point of school is to get people to either learn how to do skills or to remember things. So, like math and reading would be skills, but remembering things would, I guess, be the point of a history class, right? So, right here, um, he lists a bunch of statistics about what people remember. And then he makes the argument that like most of these facts that people remember aren't even things that people learn from being taught in school. Rather, he says they're absorbed by cultural osmosis, just things that you learn because they're culturally relevant and people talk about them, right? And he also gives an example of how like in school that he took Spanish, but he can't speak Spanish at all. You know, he only knows a couple words, and again, like hola and adios and stuff like that. And he says, well, this is not because we learn in school; it's just because of cultural, the cultural osmosis. So I think like the main part of the argument again goes back to memorization. Do you remember things? Do you forget things? Everything you go through in school, you forget the specifics of, basically. Right? He even mentions this above a bit, where he says the remaining pro school argument would be that even if they forget every specific thing, do we see on this specific thing, they still retain some kind of scaffolding that makes it easier for them to learn things in the future. Basically, it develops the skill to learn things. The skill of being able to learn things. Um, but again, memory. He's focusing a lot on this memorization of things. More about repetition and remembering specific things, like spaced repetition type learning. Then he goes on to give like a list of all of the things he remembers about the book 1984 by George Orwell. But again, he's just listing off facts, and does he remember these specific facts or whatever? Another example, now he's kind of getting into spaced repetition, right? One option might be that schools start a virtuous cycle by helping you learn something long enough that you can put yourself in situations where you can re-encounter it in the future. Again, remembering specific things, re-encountering, right? This is a huge thing that this article talks about, and it's basically the foundation for the anti-school, anti-schooling argument. So basically, I think that I agree in the sense that focusing on learning facts is like not is definitely the wrong way to go about teaching things and understanding things, like trying to remember the specific facts, the year that this happened, the name of these people, all the details of this or that situation. I would agree. Trying to remember those things is, just cause for burnout and boredom, and just not being interested in that subject at all. And yeah, sure, I agree that tests in school that ask for things like what date did this happen, or what year did this happen, or what was the name of this person who did this, or you know, or what was this person is named this, what is he famous for, like these specific facts. I agree, those are like not productive, not helpful. I mean, that's my opinion here. I'm agreeing with him on that 100%. But where I start to disagree with him, or come at it from a different perspective is, because I'm completely against this idea of remembering specific facts and specific names and specific terminologies, when it comes to, again, things like the social sciences and history, and you know most subjects really, um, unless you're a teacher, but we'll get to that in a second. The main thing that we learn when we read about history, or when we read an article on a psychological phenomenon, when we read about the childhood of someone who ended up being a notorious gangbanger, what we learn from this, the importance of this, excuse me, is not to remember the facts. It doesn't even matter if you remember that gangbanger's name. It doesn't matter if you remember his birth date, or the age he was when he joined the gang, or all of the specific incidences that he did to get to his position, all the struggles and ways he was victimized and the ways he was a victimizer. What you really learn is when you're reading this account, it's changing, it's influencing, it's coloring your worldview and how you understand the world. And it creates a building block. And so you might end up not even remembering most of that, most of the deals. You might eventually forget every detail, right? But you've already built a brick, and there might be another brick that's placed over it, and then another one, and then another one. There might be 10 bricks over it. You might forget that brick completely. But the bricks above it can only exist because that brick is existing, because that brick is there, right? Everything we read and consume, as long as we're sober, right? As long as we ain't, high as hell when we're doing it, it's going to affect us. It's going to affect our worldview. It's going to make us think. Like one example of this, like if you live in Canada, the United States, or Australia, right? Then you've probably learned about things like, I mean, the treatment of the indigenous people, residential schools, or boarding schools, um, many examples. In Canada, you would probably have briefly learned about the Indian Act. You might have read some of the amendments, and you might not remember a single amendment. All right, now I do remember some of them because some of them struck me, but you might not remember any of them. But you read some of them. You read an article on this, and it will have changed your worldview and your understanding of Canada, and your understanding of the history between the non-indigenous people and the indigenous people. I remember one amendment, I think this was in Manitoba, where, and again, I don't remember the year this happened. I don't know what version of the Indian Act this shit was amended to, because those details, they don't matter. Like I'm saying, these details, these specifics, they don't matter. Okay. Again, what I'm saying, what I'm saying matters is how it changes your worldview. And your worldview, you don't forget your worldview because it's constantly growing and evolving. Even if you forget the specific building blocks of your worldview remains influenced and colored by everything that you read. Not everything will have a big effect. Some things might have no effect, but some things are going to have an effect. if you're a Canadian and you read the Indian Act, you read some of the amendments, that is going to have an effect on your worldview. Inevitably. It is impossible that it doesn't. It's impossible that it doesn't. Okay? So you read that, and anyways, I was talking about an amendment, right? Like the Manitoba, I believe, like farmers, indigenous farmers, so like the colonizing farmers, they were apparently they were complaining that they weren't making as much profits as they used to because there was new competition in town, which was some of the indigenous farmers, and so they were bitching to the government, and then the government, passed an amendment, made an amendment where the indigenous farmers, to sell their food, their produce, they had to get permission slips signed by the government, the Indian agents who are basically the government, and I mean that would determine as well as how much they were allowed to sell. So they need permission to sell, and then they would get a limit on how much they could sell. Whereas the other farmers, the farmers, I guess they would have been from Ukraine and Germany and England, if I remember correctly, they didn't have this restriction. So that's not a fair playing field. Right? And then another example was like another amendment that's hard to forget would you basically, if you were indigenous, you basically needed a permission slip signed by an Indian agent to leave your reserve. So I mean, you read stuff like that, and of course, it's going to change your worldview. It's impossible. It's going to change your understanding of Canada, And so I remember a lot about these amendments, but again, there's tons and tons of them. So I read dozens and dozens and dozens of them. I remember, again, right in this moment, I remember too. But reading them all obviously affected my understanding of this. Another good example, something that I don't remember many specifics for, like I don't remember specific narratives, dates, nothing, is just, the treaties being breached. I've read articles of this, you know, um, but I don't remember specifics. I don't remember years. All I know is that when I read it, it affected my worldview. And now, no, I couldn't teach anyone it. I couldn't explain to someone else that, hey, treaties, this and that. Like I don't even know which treaties. I remember something about like Toronto. I believe Toronto is in unceded territory and a breach of a treaty. I believe it was Toronto, like the entirety of Toronto. But I don't remember much specifics. I couldn't teach anyone this. I couldn't. I don't know the specific details because you need the specific details to teach someone. Because if you don't have the specific details, then they're not gonna. It's not gonna be able to influence their worldview. Like if you just say they broke treaties, you know, like if I'm talking to my friend, say from Mexico, and their understanding of Canadian history is very low, and I just say they broke treaties, like that's not going to influence their worldview at all because there's not enough details there. Remember, you don't have to be able to teach something for you to have an understanding of what it is, and for it to have modified and colored your worldview and your understanding of whatever it is that whatever intellectual domain it is. This is coming from someone who, when I was in university, I was really good with flashcards. Anki, I dominated that fucking shit, man. Anki, man, I was getting, listen, I had a near perfect GPA in my major. And I would finish tests 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Midterm exam, done, 15 minutes. So I could recall that. Boom, 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 boom. The recall can be very exhausting. You spend a lot of time on that. And just for what? Because it's the things you've learned have already affected your worldview. They had already affected my worldview. Learning and being able to memorize, this term or that year or this example, that wasn't affecting my worldview at all. That wasn't affecting my understanding of the world. That wasn't making me more intelligent or any of that shit. But it's the way we test things, and so I would agree the way we test things is probably flawed. Okay, but another example, you might read about linguistic prescriptivism and descriptivism, linguistic descriptivism. Now, this is something I could explain quite well. All right, I'm not going to, but the average person might read an article on this. They might read a chapter in a book on this, and 3 years later, they might not really remember much about it at all, but they remember this. They remember the thing that influenced their worldview, the idea that, hey, you know what? He's speaking, even though he speaks differently from me, even though he doesn't sound like a news anchor, he still speaks in a coherent way, and he's not incorrect the ways he's not speaking with bad grammar, right? It's my duty if I don't understand something that he is saying. It's my duty to try to understand what he's saying because he might be saying something that has a nuance that I just don't understand, right? That's the type of worldview that just reading about prescriptivism and descriptivism versus prescriptivism can get you, right? That if you think someone's speaking poorly, it might just be that you have a poor grasp of how they're speaking. And a great example of this is the habitual B that we find in Black American English. There was a study on this, and I might just want to pull it up right now. Yeah, I can't find the exact study link anywhere. But this is another good example because I don't remember the percentages. What I do remember is that what the study showed was that the vast majority of black children in this study were able to correctly identify what the habitual be meant. So, for example, like he be playing basketball, right? As being different than saying he is playing basketball, right? Because this is a nuanced difference in some dialects of English. And so, and again, most white American children were not able to describe the difference between these two sentences. Because for most of them, it doesn't exist. But for most of the black children, that distinction does exist. And so, so somebody might read about descriptivism and prescriptivism and then think like, why are they saying this? Does this have a nuance that I'm missing? Right? Even if they aren't able to exactly describe prescriptivism and descriptivism, even if they're not able to teach this concept to somebody else, it changes their worldview. It changes how they conduct themselves in the world. It changes how they think about language and how they think about the world. Because again, your average person, the way we're taught about language in school, which is very flawed, and I might want to make a video talking about this one day. But the way we're taught about language in school will have people thinking this, that, oh, they're just stupid and they speak wrong or something stupid like that. And it's like, you're missing out on nuances here. That's what you're missing out on. Another great linguistic example could be you watch a lecture on like word categorization, right? So there are different theories of word categorization. Like there's like the classical theory of like definitions and traits, which nobody, as far as I'm aware, in linguistics, that's just like people don't take that one seriously. Like that, like the trait theory, like all dogs have this, that trait, right? I mean, this is a great example of where like I couldn't really teach this to somebody because I don't remember the best examples to give. But there's other theories like prototype theory, which says that we actually have like a prototype, like a base example of an object, and then we compare it to other objects to see if it fits similarly enough. So like we might have a prototype of stick in our mind, like a prototypical example of a stick, and then we just look in the world and compare other things and say, does it look similar enough Does it feel similar enough? Is it similar enough in all the ways that I can sense it? If so, I'm gonna consider it a stick. If not, I won't. Um, and then there's exemplar theory, which is kind of like prototype theory, but you have more than one prototype. Basically, you have exemplars, and you can kind of compare it to all your different exemplars and see if it fits in well enough. Again, this is not something that I would actually be able to teach because I'm not well. I don't remember all the specifics on this stuff. I've read it to understand it in the sense where it has affected my worldview and has affected my way of understanding how word categorization works. You know, basically why definitions, like why having a definition of a word is a flawed is really a flawed way of of how we categorize words and what words mean. I said I couldn't teach it because I don't remember enough of the specifics, but it's affected my worldview and how I think. Okay, doesn't matter if I remember this or that fact. That doesn't matter. And like right now, I'm reading a book about the history of MS-13, the gang, and as I progress through this book, like I understand more and more things, and it affects my worldview. It affects how I think about things in certain contexts. But like, I don't remember the specific details of what happened in chapter one or chapter two or chapter three. You know, I remember some details specifically about certain people, certain stories, um, but the specifics, not always. Like, I don't remember the year when MS-13 in El Salvador started to take legal ownership of transportation businesses. What I know is that they started just extorting them, and then they got more sophisticated. Like they used to just extort them like once in a while, then they started doing it weekly or bi-weekly, and then they started like trying to calculate how much money that this bus line would make by how many passengers they have and thing like that. And then they started taking legal ownership of them, you know, by force, by threat, you know. And I might forget that fact. I might forget this progression one day. I might forget that, right? That's okay because, you know, um, the idea understood here is kind of the progression of how it can become more and more sophisticated and extreme. But I don't remember the years. I don't. Listen. I don't remember the act, the name of the act that Bill Clinton passed to start deporting many people back to Central America, many gang members and other people back to Central America. I don't remember the name of that bill. I don't know what year it was passed. That doesn't does that matter though? Does remembering those facts matter? No, it doesn't because you know you read it once. Okay, you know it affects your worldview. It affects how you think about the world. It affects how you think about gangs and this gang in particular. And you know where, like when you're reading this, you're thinking about where governments went wrong. For example, you know, I mean, I remember taking a cultural anthropology course, and we learned about. See, the thing is, I don't even remember the name of this cult, the ethnic group. I don't know where the hell it was located in the world. All I know is that it influenced my worldview on the concept of gender and transgenderism. There's this culture. I don't know where they were located. All I know is that people born a man could start dressing like women and take on women tasks and things like that. And I remember that being gay in the culture was prohibited. But if you were a trans woman, I don't know what term they had for it in that culture, then you were not allowed to be with a woman. You had to be with a man, right? So I remember that dynamic. I don't remember the name of the culture, that stuck out as being very interesting. But you might not even remember specific examples like that, just to have your worldview affected in the sense of like, oh, you know what, man, like transgenderism has been a thing in many cultures around the world for for probably thousands of years, probably more, maybe. I don't know the whole history there. Because you might not remember those specific details. I just remember that one specific one because it's just so interesting to me. It was just so interesting. But again, I don't remember the specific example, so I couldn't teach it. What I'm saying in this video, right? I'm not going to try to look it up and find it. You know, um, I did try that with like the habitual bee study because I just wanted to show the study because I thought it was very interesting as well. Just to find this exact data and to see the exact sentences they used. I can't remember, couldn't find it. But in this case, it's like I'm just giving an example of what I remember and you know how it affected my worldview, or you know, and how I think about the world and people, you know, and stuff like that. But like I said, I could not teach it because I don't remember the specific facts. I don't have specific examples. I don't have the name of the culture. I don't know where they're located in the world. I don't have the sources. So I couldn't teach it, you know? I couldn't teach it. But that's what memorizing the specifics matters for, to teach it. It does not matter in terms of it affecting your mindset. And to me this is liberating. Like this understanding is liberating because listen, I talked about being an Anki hound, you know, in university. That shit was exhausting, and it put me off learning and reading afterwards because it was just like I felt like that was what learning was about. Learning was about memorizing shit. I remember like everything I would come across, I would try to remember everything about it and make flashcards. Like I remember learning about Centralia in Philadelphia, or Pennsylvania, excuse me. That's where it is. And just I don't even remember anymore. I remember at the time. I remember the year, and then I learned about like how it worked. Like I was learning about. I was trying to remember exactly like why this coal could burn for so long, and there was a specific term about like coal seams or something, and I had like tons of flashcards on. That's one example. I did that with so many things, you know. And now again, I don't do it anymore. Um, Sometimes I can take notes still. Like taking notes is okay, but not for flashcards. I don't take notes for flashcards. No flashcards. I take voice notes, voice to text. That's all I do. You know, that's all I do. And then I, you know, put it in Bing Copilot to fix the punctuation, the periods, the capitalizations, the spelling, you know, the semantics, because sometimes, you know, it hears the word wrong, and then Bing is able to, you know, fix that up. So then it looks all good, you know, quick stuff. If I ever want to reference it, great, I can reference it, you know, but most times it's not necessary to, unless I want to teach about it, right? Like that's kind of the thing. It's like sometimes you kind of want to, you might want to teach about this to some extent, but you can teach at different levels as well. It doesn't have to always be super specific. I think the article gets too caught up in like memorizing facts, right? Instead of narratives affecting your mindset and your worldview and how you think about things. Again, just adding a brick to your foundation, hundreds and hundreds of bricks added, as I was talking about as an analogy before, right? It focuses so much on remembering facts. And I get it because that's what, you know, the Western school teaches us to do. And some, you know, maybe in some specialties that's important, you know. But yeah, I mean, agree. Like, yeah, for high school students, like, you know, is that the best way to write tests? You know, remembering facts. Like, I don't know, cause this isn't something I've studied, you know. Um, but I do think, you know, in social science classes, you know, where things aren't really so objective like they are in math or in chemistry, or physics. Yeah, maybe better questions would be about things like for tests, like, how did this change your worldview, or like how could you connect this to something you already knew, or how did learning about this expand your understanding of something else. Maybe we should be asking questions like this instead on tests. I don't know I really don't. I don't have the answer to that, but I do think that learning about history and social sciences is important for people, for high school students. You know what I'm saying? Just because it affects the worldview. I mean, listen, like think about anyone in an echo chamber. We know echo chambers, right? Echo chambers are proliferated in this modern day. We all know someone in an echo chamber. We've seen echo chambers. You can go into Reddit and find echo chambers. You go into Twitter and find echo chambers. You go into YouTube, you find echo chambers. Where else we find echo chambers? Everywhere, man. Echo chambers are just, 2024, baby. We all about echo chambers. I would argue that the same thing is happening with echo chambers. I mean, you could go into one of these echo chambers and you could try to ask them to give specific examples of why they think this or why they think that, um, but they won't be. Most of them won't be able to, and it's not because they're stupid necessarily. I mean, look, anyone in echo chambers, it's I pity anyone in the echo chamber. You know, it's not necessarily their fault. You kind of get trapped in them, and sometimes algorithms get you in them. But it's not because they're not well read. It's just because they're not, they couldn't teach it. Just because you can't teach something doesn't mean you don't know it. Doesn't mean it hasn't influenced your worldview. You know. So they read all these articles from one perspective, and they read them and they read them and they read them and they read them, and each time they read something, it's a building block, it's a building block, it's a building block, and eventually there's so many building blocks over their original building blocks, they don't remember what those building blocks were, but they're still there. They still had an influence. Because again, we might forget facts, we might forget stories, but we don't forget our perspective. We don't forget our our worldview, because we can't. Like, that's our bias. Everyone has a bias. Our worldview is our bias. Every time we read a story, we have our worldview working subconsciously. We can't control that shit. It just is. So it's like you might, read some stories about the president of your country, or some politician of your country, you know, being corrupt, but you might have read 3 articles over the past year. You probably won't be able to remember the month it happened in, or the corporation who paid him off, or how much money he was paid off. Some people will remember these specific details, right? But most won't, and those who don't doesn't mean they didn't learn anything from reading these articles, right? Their worldview is still changed. Their perspective on this person has changed because they read things about them. You just might not be able to remember. I mean, we have opinions about people, our friends or our coworkers or whatever. You know, uh, you have experiences with these people, and you're going to develop an opinion about them, a feeling about them, and you might not be able to trace exactly why you feel this way about that person, right? It's because every interaction you have, it affects your view on them, even if you can't remember the specifics of why. 100%. We don't have to remember specific facts. And I keep harping on that point, but specific facts, they don't matter unless you're a teacher, unless you're a policymaker, unless you're writing a book, then they matter. But in most cases, we reading things, listening to lectures about history, about anthropology, about any of the social sciences, even the physical sciences, right? Um, it's just about the effect it has on you is just changing your worldview. That's all it is. You don't have to ace everything. You don't have to be able to write a book. You don't have to be able to lecture the lecture that you just listened to. Like be able to give the lecture that you just listened to. You know, like I remember listening to a lecture about game theory, the prisoner's dilemma. Excuse me, and all the different the history of it. You know, how it had started with just tit for tat, and then there was that like more forgiving tit for tat name, which again I don't remember the name of it. I don't remember what they called it, where um, you'd only not cooperate if they don't cooperate with you twice, and all this. There's tons of strategies, right? Um, I remember learning about that. I couldn't give a lecture on it, but it definitely influenced my worldview, right? It influenced my worldview, even if I don't remember most of the specifics or any specifics about it. So going back to the main thing, right? So who's to say that? And I'm not saying schools currently have this right, but I'm just saying theoretically, because again, the article at the end, there's that. What's that quote say at the end? On a purely theoretical basis, of course. Yeah, exactly. On a purely theoretical basis, of course. Who's to say that someone, excuse me, a curriculum maker couldn't curate the like a nice set of history to learn about, books to read, lectures to listen to, that will have positive effects on our mindsets, our worldviews, the way we view the world, and things of that nature. You know, like I would love to do that with linguistics. I don't want to go into too much of a rant here, but I do have a huge problem with modern linguistics, how linguistics is taught to people in school, in modern school. I have a huge problem with that. I think it's fucking atrocious, and it'd be nice if we just there was a couple lectures people could listen to, a couple books or stories people could listen to, some concepts they could learn about. You know, that would totally be a game changer. That would totally be a game changer in my opinion. And they don't have to be able to teach it after. They don't even have to remember. Like they might, again, going back to descriptivism versus prescriptivism, they might not even remember the damn terms descriptivism and prescriptivism, but they remember the concept to the extent where it affected their worldview and how they analyze language and stuff like that. Don't have to remember this. The specifics don't matter, and I keep saying this over and over again. Specifics don't matter. It's not about that. It's about the worldview, the mindset, the building blocks that it creates. Theoretically, I think in theoretical situation, having schools is better than not having schools for high school. So this article is mostly about like high school. You know, it's not about reading. It's not about learning math and that type of stuff. It's mostly about like high school type stuff. So, all right, I'm gonna edit this video down, make it shorter. But other than that, peace out.